Okay, so let's talk about Netflix. Specifically, how they built one of the most envied, and yet one of the most controversial corporate cultures in the entire world. It's a culture that's allowed them to completely reinvent themselves again and again and just dominate an industry they once begged to even be a small part of.
To really get this, you have to picture it. It's the year 2000. Netflix co-founder Reed Hastings is standing inside the headquarters of Blockbuster, the $6 billion giant, and he's there to offer them his tiny, struggling little startup for just $50 million.
And they were literally laughed out of the room. The CEO of Blockbuster just flat out said no. Hastings remembers leaving that meeting just feeling crushed, picturing all 60,000 Blockbuster employees having a good laugh at this absurd idea. I mean, why would a titan like them ever be interested in a flailing wannabe?
But what happened next? Well, it's the stuff of business legend. A mere decade after laughing Netflix out of their office, Blockbuster was bankrupt. And that little wannabe? It grew into a global powerhouse, totally changing the game forever.
So the big question, the one everybody asks, is just how? How did this happen? Blockbuster had the brand, they had the money, they had all the power. What on earth was Netflix's secret weapon?
Well, according to Hastings, it comes down to one thing, and it's not what you'd think. It wasn't technology, it was their culture. A culture that put people way ahead of process, and innovation way ahead of efficiency. It was all about freedom, not control.
And here's the kicker. This brilliant, world-changing culture, it wasn't dreamed up in some fancy boardroom. Nope. It was actually forged in the fire of a crisis that almost wiped the company off the map.
So back in 2001, the dot-com bubble burst. All that venture capital money just vanished. And Netflix, just to stay alive, had to lay off a third of its people. 40 out of their 120 employees had to go. They could only afford to keep their absolute top performers.
But then something totally unexpected happened. To Hastings' complete amazement, the office was suddenly buzzing. With a third fewer people, the energy, the passion, the performance, it all skyrocketed. That's when they knew they'd stumbled onto something huge.
That discovery, right there, became the foundation for their entire philosophy. They call it freedom and responsibility. And it's basically an engine built on 3 core pillars that all have to work together.
Think of it like a flywheel, right? It all starts with building what they call talent density. Once you have that, it gives you permission to increase candor. And only when you have those first 2 pieces in place can you do the really crazy part, start removing controls and giving people an incredible amount of freedom.
So let's dig into that first pillar, maximizing talent density. This is the absolute bedrock of the whole system. And, it requires a pretty big mental shift in how you even think about what a company is. You know how so many companies love to say, we're a family. Well, Netflix decided that's actually the wrong metaphor. In a family, you're kind of stuck with each other, right? Performance doesn't really matter. Instead, they see themselves as a professional sports team. Every single player is exceptional, and they all push each other to be even better. The goal isn't just belonging, it's winning championships.
And this pro-sports team mindset leads to probably their most famous and, let's be honest, their most controversial policy, the keeper test. It's a really simple question that managers are constantly asking themselves. If the answer is no, then that employee is let go, but with a really generous severance package. The whole point is to make sure every single role is filled with what they call a stunning colleague, someone you would absolutely fight to keep.
Okay, so you've built this dream team of stunning colleagues. Now what? Well, the next step is to get them to talk to each other honestly. Like, really honestly. And this is another place where they just completely diverge from how most companies operate.
See, at Netflix, they reframe the whole idea of honesty. They believe that holding back helpful feedback isn't being polite, it's actually being disloyal. You are actively hurting the company and your teammates if you don't speak up and help them get better.
Now, this can't just be a brutal free-for-all, right? It's not about just tearing people down. So they have these 4A feedback guidelines to make it work. It's a system designed to make all this candor constructive, not destructive. And notice that last step. The person getting the feedback is totally free to either accept it or just discard it. That preserves their autonomy.
And this brings us to the final and by far the most radical step in the whole engine.
Once you have that high talent density and you've got a culture of intense candor, that's when you can start getting rid of the rules.
I mean, think about a typical company. They have these enormous handbooks with rules for everything, all designed to stop a few bad apples from making mistakes. Netflix's take? If you only hire stunning colleagues, you don't need all those rules. So they basically just tore up the handbook.
Get this. Their entire expense policy is 5 words. That's it. They trust their people to use their best judgment and do what's right for the company. They lead with context, not by controlling every little thing.
And this all serves one ultimate goal: to be a highly aligned, loosely coupled organization. What does that mean? Well, leaders provide a super clear North Star. That's the highly aligned part. But then they get out of the way. That's the loosely coupled part. They trust the team to figure out the best way to get there on their own. So when you put all this together, you start to see that it forces a fundamental choice about how you want to run your organization. It's really a choice between 2 very different kinds of music.
Is your goal to be a symphony orchestra? You know, precise, synchronized, where eliminating errors is the most important thing. That's perfect for some industries. Or is your goal to be a jazz band, where it's all about individual mastery, improvisation, and agility that leads to something brand new? Sure, it can get a little messy, but that's where true innovation comes from.
Netflix chose to be a jazz band, and it allowed them to compose a whole new future for entertainment. But the real question this leaves us with is, what kind of music is your organization trying to make? And do you have the right musicians and the right setup to actually play it?